All right, Tori, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm so excited. Before we started recording, we were having a little conversation, and I was telling you and telling the listeners that I've interviewed a lot of survivors of domestic violence, but I have not had someone come on who talks about really what life looks like post abuse and the resources and help that survivors should know about, but really don't know about, especially when it comes to the legal system. And I do want to say out there right now, she is not a lawyer, but she is someone who can definitely help you in the process when it comes to figuring out what the fuck is my life going to look like now that I'm out of this abusive relationship. So I want you to introduce yourself. For anyone who's meeting you for the first time, let them know who is Tori Benitez.
Yeah, so I'm Tori Benitez. I have a business. It's called Onyx Arrow Consulting, and I act more like a family court strategist, if you will. So, yes, I'm not an attorney. I have several legal degrees. I'm also certified in electronic discovery, which a lot of people don't know. So, I can run people's metadata and all of that fun stuff. And I'm also a survivor of domestic violence myself. So, I know both worlds of being in an abusive relationship, strategizing on how to escape the abusive relationship, and then navigating post separation abuse. So I think all of those pieces also allow me to help other victims, whether they are still in it, trying to leave post separation abuse. So I'm trying to fill the hole in basically the family court system.
Yes, I love that you are creating your own path in regards to helping survivors with what you've gone through. And I definitely want to talk about your experience prior to you starting your business and the coaching and consulting and strategizing that you do. So, give us as much or as little as you're comfortable with talking about, but what did your life look like when you were in these abusive relationships?
Well, first of all, I will say I like that you said it plural because what I wanted to point out is that a lot of victims, it's actually extremely common to fall in multiple abusive relationships. And for me, it actually comes from childhood. And when I say childhood, I'm talking any age prior to 18. So it could have been when you were a newborn and not getting the love and care that you need from a parent, or something else later in life. And it could have been your home life, it could have been your community, school, things like that. So I never actually connected the dots that I've been in multiple abusive relationships. And I also think that abuse isn't talked about enough. So when you're in the abuse, you either think it's normal or, oh, well, he didn't hit me. And I say he because those are the type of relationships I'm in. But I didn't know it was multiple and it never clicked for me. So yeah, I've been in multiple and different dynamics. So I have been in some that were physically abusive, and I have called the cops for help and been failed. I have had bruises all over my body and my family not believing me and covering the bruises and continuing with life and trying to basically get over being depressed and act like everything's fine. So I've been in those relationships. And I've been in the ones that are more like nuanced, if you will, where it is the financial abuse, where it is coercive control, which I think we're going to get into in a little bit. But I think those are harder to explain to people because, well, there's no bruises on your body. Well, he seems like a nice guy, and I've been in all of that. And I also share a child with my abuser. So, I've been in multiple of them and navigating some that are scarier than others with guns involved. I've seen posts online where they have threatened to drag me and have people basically hunt me down. And I kind of say that with a laugh because I've almost had to become numb to seeing these things. And I have seen firsthand with my own experience that nobody helps you as far as like police. Well, he's not there yet. Or lawyers, well, you have a restraining order. Like, okay, that it's just a piece of paper. So I have been in multiple relationships that are abusive, and I have noticed through my own therapy of finding my own worth, and then that is also something that I can pass on to my clients of, "You are worth so much more than this." And just because someone doesn't put their hands on you does not mean it's not abuse. And I kinda get my own justice out of helping other people and sparking a fire in them.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you so much for mentioning that relationships like these are not only one size fits all, meaning it's not only that if he puts his hands on you, then you're in an abusive relationship. There's so many people that I've known, that I've connected with, that I've interviewed. Even my own personal sister, she's gone public with her situation, so I'm comfortable talking about it. But she was in an emotionally abusive relationship for almost a decade. Never once did he put hands on her, but she was miserable. And I think a lot of people, and especially a lot of women, that's my target audience of the listeners that tune in, we tend to ignore those red flags that come in these types of relationships because it hasn't escalated to the point that, like you said, there's bruising on you. I would love for you to share. We talked about coercive control. For someone who's hearing that term for the first time, explain in your words what that means and what are some other signs of abuse that we should look out for.
Sure. So I think before defining what coercive control is, I think a lot of people don't actually understand the word coercion because that can fall into multiple things. And what I've noticed with my own experience and my clients as well is that that can fall into like labeling abuse, but also sexual coercion. So I think defining the word coercion is huge, where coercion is not necessarily threatening someone. It could be, but it's more of using intimidation or grooming, meaning kind of like Pavlov response, where they make you numb to whatever they're doing. They're conditioning you to where it's not so bad, or conditioning you to say yes to certain situations. So coercion itself is not, necessarily like pinning you against a wall or whatever the physical aspect is. It is conditioning you into these types of situations. It is more of the power and control dynamic. So when you're in a coercively controlling relationship, that is the basis of it is power and control. So it may not be physical abuse. And it actually takes an average of 5 years for an abusive relationship to become physically abusive. Just because somebody is not physically abusive doesn't mean like that is a terrible marker of abuse. You could be in emotionally abusive relationship, financial abuse, and all of that. And the umbrella of that is coercive control. So signs of that is more of I would look for the love bombing in the beginning, like almost the dating part of the relationship, future faking, or you're the one for me, or I can't wait to marry you, like I want to have babies with you, or whatever. But that's actually the grooming of it, the conditioning you. And then you get to the part where a lot of victims of coercive control are now forced to be stay at home moms, but have no access to the money. And they think, oh, that's so cute. Like, well, he's taking care of us. Okay, but you have to ask him for an allowance. He is intentionally doing that for you, intentionally keeping you trapped. If you can't go to the grocery store and buy whatever you want because you're on a budget, or maybe you can't even see a therapist because they don't want you to release these incidents within the relationship, whether it is, emotionally or financially or whatever. Things like that. A lot of times it is once you've had the child, no, you can't put them in daycare. Okay, well, they do that on purpose so you can't make your own money.
So you don't have that independence.
Correct. It's isolation, it's threatening. It could be even little things like it could be an example of it is like, let's say you have, I don't know, my parents have died. I'm just making up this situation. My parents have died. But if I had something of my dad's and let's say my abuser would look at it, like if I didn't do what my abuser wanted, like that conditioning of knowing My abuser means he's going to damage it. That is part of the coercive control. Even though they're not putting their hands on you, it is, I have to do what I'm being told. I have to say yes because that thing, the object or whatever they're talking about, I want that. So even though you're saying yes, you're actually coerced into saying yes or coerced into whatever it is that they're forcing you to do. So the umbrella of it is the isolation, the threats, and things like that.
There's so many layers to it, and I appreciate you highlighting a lot of different ones because people, again, really don't think about all of the different levels of abuse that can happen in these relationships unless you see like a bloody nose or a black eye or something. They're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, he's an abuser." But no, like there's so many of us. I'm pretty sure there's listeners that are listening right now and being like, "This sounds so familiar." So I appreciate you coming on to have this conversation to hopefully help at least one person realize, "Okay, maybe I need to start reevaluating my own situation." Before we get into how you help your clients, was there this, like, epiphany that you had for you when you realized, like, "I don't wanna continue experiencing these types of relationships, I need to get out permanently," and what did that look like for you in your last relationship?
Yeah, so my last relationship, that is actually I it actually happened right before the pandemic, and that was probably my scariest, and I share a child with him, and I've had past abusive relationships, so I kind of was like, I don't wanna put up with this shit anymore. Like, I put up with several things that he did, and I was actually, again, the conditioning of the jokes. I was actually text a lot. He would say, "I'm so mad I could kill someone right now." And I thought like, okay, people say it all the time. Like, well, it's not that serious. Whatever. He's never killed anyone. And then it kept going. And it was every time he was mad and I didn't do what he wanted. We actually planned our child, and when I found out I was pregnant, he wanted me to have an abortion. And I said, I'm not doing that. And even though we planned the child, I didn't do what he wanted, and so he snapped. And it actually was, he is an alcoholic and was hiding it, and I didn't catch on. I've actually never been in a relationship with an alcoholic. I don't have alcoholism run in my family. I wasn't around that. And I'm a very empathetic person where, okay, he's just having a bad day. Like, it's okay to have a drink. And I also live in wine country. Like, whatever, there's wine everywhere. And so I'm like, whatever, but he got trashed because I told him I didn't want to have abortion and lost his job because he was drinking at a winery that he was working at. It just became a big mess. And that I was slowly, like, it wasn't really a light bulb moment for me, but it was more so of, I don't know, spidey senses. Like, I'm like, this just doesn't feel good.
That intuition that we all have.
Right, and I think that's something that is huge that a lot of us ignore, and I should have ignored it before he even moved in with me, and I didn't because, oh, he's we actually met when we were younger, and he said, "Oh, I'm better now, I don't do this and that," so I believed everything, "Oh, everyone is honest," and it was bullshit. And it escalated into, I would find bottles hidden in the garage, and I'm like, no, handles of liquor. I couldn't keep a job and wasn't helping pay rent. And it was just things piling on top of me being pregnant and yelling, throwing things. I'm like, I'm not going to be around this. And I actually documented enough. I would say not quite a bit because we weren't actually together very long because I was like, I'm not dealing with this shit. I also found, he gave me the password to his phone, and I guess he forgot he did that. And I found multiple text videos, you have it, to other women. And I was like, okay, so I'm dealing with an abuser, an alcoholic, and a cheater, and I'm pregnant. Like, hell fucking no. And I was like, that's it. Think I confronted him about it. There were lies, and he said, like, I won't do it anymore. They try and get you to stay. And I kind of was like, okay, let me think about this. I want to observe. I try not to jump to conclusions. I try and give people a chance to, I don't know what. And I noticed he was just hiding it more. Like he didn't change the, he was like, I'm going to change, keep the password the same on my phone. You'll see everything. I'll act right, whatever. And he didn't. I mean, he kept the password, but he didn't change. And it just got worse. I just found more information. It got worse. And I was like, that's it. I know that I need to file a restraining order because I have other kids from previous relationships. And the last thing I was going to do was lose my kids over a man. I will live on the fucking streets if that's what I have to do. I will not lose my children over somebody else. So I went and I took a couple of the pictures, the messages he sent me, and I went to the domestic violence organization and I said, I need a restraining order immediately. And I filed one. And that was actually the only way I could get him off my lease. He was on the lease, and even the cops said, like, we won't even remove him because he's on your lease. And I'm like, I'm telling you about the abuse. I'm telling you about all of these other things he was doing. And they said, no, he's on the lease. There's nothing we can do. And so I knew the only thing I could do, like step one, was getting him off my lease, getting him away from my kids, and having that space so I could be safe and my kids could be safe. So I did that. 2 weeks later was the shutdown. And that's also when they put it in place that you could not evict somebody. And I was like, I could not believe the timing of it all, that I got so lucky that I did that at the right moment. Also, the fact that I was pregnant and I was actually not scared to be pregnant in the pandemic with no man by my side. Like I was like, fuck this. I'll do it myself. Like I gave you the chance. I'm not going back to somebody because I am having their child. That's not an option for me. So, he was still messaging other women, using other women. There was a lot of them. And our court date was delayed, took a very long time. And I was finally granted. It was a temporary restraining order for most of the pandemic or most of 2020. Actually, it was like 2 weeks before I had the baby. They were like, oh, court date, 1 year. You'll get 1 year restraining order. I'm like, are you kidding me? I couldn't believe it, but I'm like, I'll take the 1 year. And I had her alone in the hospital. Like, my friend luckily became a doula, and I she took care of me in the hospital and checked on me. I had my aunt take care of my other two children, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do because this is the only option I have. And like I said, I'm not going back to a man who I'm going to lose my other kids for, or even the baby. I'm not doing it. I went back to school. I just felt in my heart, like, first of all, I hate school. I hate school. I actually, when I first went to college, I was studying fashion design. It had nothing, like, I was like, I just want to be in the arts. I love creative people. And I was like, okay, cool. And so my third child was like 4 months old, I think. And I went back to school in 21, January of 21. And I was like, I have to study the legal system. And that's what I did. And I have obtained, I think, I honestly lose track of it, maybe like 4 certifications, 2 degrees, 2 undergrad degrees. One of the certifications is the high conflict divorce and custody consulting. And I had all three here by myself. No family to help me. And I honestly look back on it like, how the fuck did I do that? But when you have that drive of, I am not going back to that, you get scrappy with it. Like, you got to be resourceful. Like, this is what it is. And I did it.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. You are giving so many people who are listening empowerment within themselves to know, like, you don't need to continue accepting this bullshit from this shitty relationship. You can take your power back. I know it feels like, what the fuck am I going to do now? Especially if you don't have support, but being able to listen to someone like you who's been through it and who gets it, I appreciate you so much for really diving deep and sharing your full truth and your full story because it's powerful. It's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah. And there's a lot of women that I've come across that say, like, I don't have support. And I didn't have support. Like I said, both of my parents have died. I didn't have anybody. I didn't have anybody. And I did whatever I needed to do. School, my kids at home, the pandemic shut down. I had kids that were in the public school system that were doing school from home. Like, you do whatever you need to do.
Absolutely. If you don't wanna continue the cycle.
Yeah.
I love that so much. So now I want to ask you again, she's not a lawyer, you guys, but I definitely want to get your opinion in regards to navigating the legal system for survivors of abuse. What would you say is the most difficult part for them when they do decide to go down that path?
So I think the most difficult is actually switching your mindset because when you're a victim and even entering in the abusive relationship, you're on emotion. And you sit here and think like, well, he's a nice guy, and you're just solely driven on emotion. And when you enter into even just switching your mindset to like, now I have to escape, you have to switch to strategy. And you cannot, you honestly, you can't care about emotion. Like, they didn't care what they did to you, so you gotta switch that to survival mindset strategy. You have to turn off the emotion. Go do emotion with your therapist, your friend, your divorce coach, whatever it is, but, like, you cannot do emotion in court with your abuser, with the lawyers. They honestly don't care.
I'm so glad you pointed that out because it makes me think of my situation when I physically escaped from him. It was March 12th, 2021. I ran to my best friend's house. I drove and then I ran to her house. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm banging on her door, half naked, and she's looking at me like, what the fuck just happened? And then I remember, I'll never forget, I was like, you have to help me. He's going to kill me. And then she was like, "Leanne, you need to call 911." And my first thought was like, I don't want to get him in trouble. Even though this person physically abused me to the point that I almost lost my life and I was terrified of him, my first thought was like, I'm scared because I don't want to get him in trouble. And I think a lot of us need, like you said, to not lead with that emotion. And thank God for my best friend. Like, it was because of her that I decided to get justice, which was a whole thing in and of itself, but it was because I turned off that emotion and I started using my brain to be like, "No, something needs to fucking change. This person needs to be in prison because he's done it before and he's gonna do it again." You know what I mean? So I appreciate you
Yeah.
for talking about that.
I have a big mouth. I actually got in an argument with a, detective because I'm like, "You guys are failing victims." And the conversation was that they go to victims at any stage, whether you're in the hospital because of what they did, or maybe you're reporting rape or whatever, and they ask you, well, do you want to press charges? And a lot of them will say no because they want to protect them. And I'm like, stop fucking asking them that. You should press charges. Like, this is a crime and you're there to protect people. You should say, this is what we have to do. We have to press charges and just do it. And he was like, well, we can't do that. I'm like, bullshit.
Yeah. And I know it varies from state to state. Like the state that I was in was Florida when this happened, and the laws there are completely different as to where I am now in New Jersey. Like if a crime happens of domestic violence, like when I was in Florida, I could not drop the charges if I wanted to. That was completely different compared to here in New Jersey. If I wanted to drop the charges, I could. So I know it varies from state to state, and I'm grateful, not grateful, but I am grateful that it did happen in Florida and that that power was taken away from me because I probably would have.
Yeah.
So you talked about it a little bit before when it comes to writing things down, and I would love for you to talk about how can we list the abusive behavior on court documents correctly?
Okay, so I think we touched a little bit on it that there is no cookie cutter right or wrong. And part of that is you have to remember that humans are running your court system. So you also have to play on psychology a little. So to know your audience. But for victims to start the documentation system, I highly recommend writing it down, taking pictures, and depending on everybody's situation, there needs to be a different plan, if you will. So what I mean by that is knowing your opponent essentially, and if they are controlling in certain ways, maybe you make a fake email address that you don't tell him about and don't give him the password to, and you don't auto save the password. And that is where you kind of write out your incidents or maybe the name calling. I actually did that in a relationship that I had. I was just dating him, and one of my friends is like, he's verbally abusive to you. I'm like, no, he's not. And I started writing out what he was saying to me, and I went back and read it. Like when I was finally in the mindset to be like, what an asshole. Like you're saying all these things. And so sometimes that helps of disconnecting a little bit as a victim and writing it out. But you don't want to put it in the notes of your phone because they probably have your password, they're probably hacking it, and they're going to catch on to that you're trying to escape. And then they're going to delete it. So I would make sure that you do it in something like an email address or something that you're not auto saving the password on. And as far as documents, like physical documents, a lot of people also don't think to start a physical copy. So, all of your bank statements, if you're married, you need all your tax returns. If you're not married, you could still take the tax returns because you probably have a child with them. You're going to need child support. They're probably going to lie, and you need proof on all of that. And so it kind of depends on what situation you're in as a victim and who your opponent is. And I say opponent because, again, it's strategy once you're in the court system. And unfortunately, I would not put all of my eggs in one basket and think the court system is going to save you. You have to do a lot of it yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Thinking for me and the whole legal route that I went, I'm lucky that it went in my favor from the night of until he got sentenced. I know that's not a normal thing for a lot of survivors to deal with, and I'm definitely grateful for it. But I appreciate people like you who have the resources and have the knowledge that they can pass on to future clients to help them feel less alone. Because when you're in these types of situations, you feel so fucking alone. You can't understand the terminology. They're throwing all these things at you. You're already emotionally fucking taxed. The work that you're doing is so, so important. So, what would you say are some ways that survivors can protect themselves from post separation abuse? We know as survivors that the most dangerous time in the relationship is when the survivor decides to leave. That's usually when the abuse escalates even more, the stalking happens, threats, all of that. So what are some ways that after the abuse, you're out of the relationship that we can protect ourselves?
Yeah, I the studies that I have read within the U.S. is about 70% of women actually get murdered once they are moved to the step of leaving. So it is absolutely the most dangerous part. But I also want to point out that I just want to be very honest and say that there is no way to protect yourself against the post separation abuse. You can prepare yourself, but there's only certain steps that you can take and protect yourself without knowing like, oh, I'm avoiding it because you may not be able to avoid it. But I feel the only way to get to that point of protecting yourself is documenting before you leave because it is likely that they're not stalking you as soon as you leave. They're going to do it before the cyber hacking, the harassing, the threatening, all of that. I really want people to know that if you're in an abusive relationship, do not think that you're just going to leave and, oh, we'll just figure out custody or he'll just leave me alone. It is not that. And I was actually just talking to someone who was asking around for help and said, diminishing well, he's just not nice to me. I'm like, no, 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 he's abusive. Like, you're already changing your verbiage because you've been conditioned. And it was, well, I'm just going to probably just move in with family. Like, if you're in an abusive relationship, you need to know that when they can't have power and control over you, they're going to do it in the family court system. They're going to take your kids away from you. They're going to say you're an unfit mom. They're going to claim that you have mental problems, that They're going to mention postpartum depression, even if you didn't have it. They're going to throw anything out there. So the best way to strategize against it is to do that before you leave and document everything you can. And I think some of these incidents, you as a victim should also know that they border on federal crimes. Like cyber hacking and stalking is a federal crime. And when you can have proof of that, that ups in the family court system is like, I would highly recommend that people press charges on that.
Absolutely. Document every fucking thing and don't think
Mhm.
that like, "Oh, I'm doing too much or I'm being paranoid." Like, no, I rather you do too much than not enough and then that bites you in the ass later on.
Exactly.
So what would you say as a survivor and, a coach, strategist and all of that? What can someone do in order to start taking their power back after leaving? Because, like we said before, it's very emotional. You're drained. You probably don't want to fight because you've been fighting for so long. What advice would you share with someone right in the beginning in order to start, building yourself back up?
I think a huge thing is therapy, to be honest. I think that I think as a society, for some reason we have this mindset that therapy is bad, but I also think that because of that mindset, that's why as a child, you've grown into these abusive relationships because maybe you didn't have therapy as a child or as a teen or in your 20s or whatever. And I think if you're not already in therapy, to get into therapy because sometimes victims fall into like family not believing the abuse or the friends not believing the abuse. And when you have a therapist who is educated on trauma, they're going to process everything that you've gone through and say, like, no, this is abuse. Like, no, this is this situation. And they're going to help you get through, like, you're in these muddy waters and you need someone to help you out. And I also like reminding my clients that it's also okay to sit there. Like, it's okay to feel like if you're drained, sit there. Have a movie day, like, veg on food, like, you don't have to run all the time. And I personally feel like when you're in the abuse, it's really like sitting in a really dark tunnel. Like, you don't know where the exit is, you can't see anything, and sometimes it's like screaming out for help, no one's helping you. But what happens if you sit there and you let your eyes adjust? What if you don't scream? What if you just take in what's going on and say like, "Okay, maybe I can slowly kind of like feel my way out and take these baby steps and that's okay." So, I think just reminding yourself that it's okay to do therapy, it's okay to just sit there and take it all in and not feel like every day you have to battle.
That's so powerful. I think a lot of us struggle with rest, especially, as people of color growing up. That's definitely not something that was normalized in my home. And it's okay to feel your feelings. A lot of us don't like to feel those uncomfortable feelings, but once you do, that's when the healing can start. And it's okay to take as much time as you need, but just don't stay there for too long because we got shit to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotta get up and fight.
You
Yep.
gotta, you have to. So what would you say, thinking back of your whole life, all the experiences that you've gone through, what's the most important lesson you've learned about yourself?
I think speaking my truth and not holding it in of your traumas and what's happened to you because it actually does store in your body, whether it is abusive relationships or whatever, is when you're holding it in, you actually destroy your own body, like your mind, health problems, and so on. So, and actually, I don't know if you've heard of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So that is one of them. Is even as a child, you can grow up to have more health problems because of even just witnessing abuse, like your parents fighting or whatever. So I think it's powerful to speak on your situation, whether it's maybe not a abusive romantic relationship. Maybe it was, hey, I saw my parents fight as a child, and I need to get this out of my body, and so then I can move on to something else in my life. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for me, starting my podcast was so healing for me because I was taking my power back by using my voice after being silenced for so long in these really toxic relationships. So I agree. I don't think you really need, like, everyone doesn't need to start a podcast or become a coach or do something that grand, but just finding a way to be able to get those feelings out, like we said, it can be so healing.
Yeah.
So think back to childhood, whatever age pops up for you. Being who you are today, what is one piece of advice you would tell her?
This is really interesting because as a child, I was actually left alone a lot. I have so many memories. I actually have the weirdest memory of being left alone in my crib. Like, I have weird memory. Like, I have memories of kindergarten. I don't know how I have these memories. I remember everything. And I was left alone a lot. And I don't mean like my parents worked. My parents were a actual huge part of this community and they didn't necessarily like ignore us, but really it was kind of at that day and age, like we walked home from school, we cooked our own food, that kind of stuff. And I live in a very small town, so it's like nothing's gonna happen to you. And I was left alone a lot. And that's actually something that I've learned from my last abusive relationship where it's okay to be alone. Like sometimes you have that mindset of neglect, but taking that back and saying, like, how can I sit in my own silence and learn who I am so somebody else doesn't take that power from me and like try and tell me who I am or try and tell me what my interests are and what to do for them. Like now I can stand on my own and say, you're not gonna fucking talk to me like that. Like, no, you wanna date me? Then you better step up and you better do this. And like, how are you gonna provide for me? Like,
Right.
no, I've done it. Like, I've even scared I've scared some guys away because they'll send me pictures and I'll run the metadata and I'm like, yeah, you took this 6 months ago. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, don't send me some stupid ass pictures that you
Yeah,
sent women. And they're like, okay, you're crazy. I'm like, bye. Like I'm like, no. And I know I intimidate men and I have no fucking problem with it. But I've sat by myself to say like, who am I? I've done therapy and I continue to do therapy and I've learned like, you know, like I said, I hated school, but I went to school and I sat in there by myself, of doing this. No one was sitting there cheering me on. I kind of tuned out everyone. I stopped hanging out with friends. I stopped drinking alcohol. I was like, I'm going to exercise. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to do therapy. And I was sitting with myself. So that kind of healed as a child sitting by myself because I it's the same situation but two different outlooks, if you will.
that is so powerful. That's literally the season that I'm in right now. I was definitely the type of person who would use other people to numb from the pain and hated being alone. My whole situation happened a little over 2 years ago, and since then, I've been celibate, I've been single, not dating, focusing on Leanne, and really getting to know who I am on my own. So when I do decide to go back out there, the shit that I dealt with before is never gonna fucking happen again because my standards are so high. And I think it's really important for us, especially as survivors of trauma and abuse, to like learn how to sit in silence by yourself, like you said, and really get to know who the fuck you are at your core. Because the healing and the standards that the shifts that are going to happen, life changing. But we have to take that time being uncomfortable on our own.
Yeah, and I think that's like, when you're in an abusive relationship and it's isolation. When you're finally in that like by yourself, you're like, isolate me, bitch. Like I dare you. I will fucking rise and you won't know what the fuck hit you. Like I'm fine with isolation. I love the pandemic, I'm like, cool. And like, guys are like, oh shit, what are you gonna do now?
Exactly. Absolutely. That's so powerful. Yeah, like I love my own company now. I fucking hate
Yeah.
other people.
Right. Me too. I'm like, nope.
Yes.
My phone's on do not disturb. Do not talk to me. Do not. Nope. You want to take
I'll
me on a
reach out
date?
when
Are
I'm
you
ready.
sending me? Yeah. You want to send me flowers? You want to send like? No. You got to step up. Like
Exactly. Period. Oh, and that's what happens when you really focus on the relationship that you have with yourself. I love that. All right. So, final question I want to know, since you're on the Watch Us Thrive podcast, tell me your definition of thriving.
I love this question. So I think thriving is doing what you previously marked as impossible. In your mind, you had this bar of, I can't do that. That's impossible. Like, I can't escape this relationship. It's impossible. I can't survive without. Like, no. Like, redefining what you thought was impossible and rising from that and consistently moving that bar of impossibility.
That is such a good fucking answer. I couldn't think of a better way to end this conversation. I appreciate you so much. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I know my listeners are gonna wanna learn more about you, possibly work with you. So plug it all in, let them know how we can get more of your energy.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and TikTok, Onyx Arrow Consulting, and I actually take clients US wide. So I am based in California. I have clients all over. I help clients in just about every state. I also have clients reaching out to me from Canada and other countries. I'm kind of just moving slow right now, just because I also have my own kids. But if anyone wants to DM me, I try and help as many people as I can, just even through the DMs, because I know even free help is hard to come by. So if anyone wants to reach out to me through DMs or onyx-arrow.com is my website. And I have all of my information on there. And I do one on one sessions on the phone or membership. So I kind of just piece it together however the clients need.
Yes. Like I said, the work that you're doing is changing fucking lives. I appreciate you so much for being able to turn your pain into your power. That's really the epitome of the type of guests I like having on my podcast. You're out here thriving. You're not taking no bullshit from nobody. So I appreciate you so, so much.
I'm turning my pain into profit, honey.
Yes.
Like it.
Okay. Yes, she's securing the bag. Thank you, honey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.